Welcome to the Big Picture Show Revealed. And once again, we have Michael O'Connor, our resident holistic astrologer for the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy, with us today. And today's topic is Life Comes from Life. So welcome back to the show, Michael. Great to have you here. Sounds like an interesting topic. So let's get busy.
All right. Thanks, Tyson. This could be seen as a sequel to the previous one, the origin of archetypes. The question of life is its own philosophical one. We can speak of consciousness. We can speak of origins when we, and this gets into theological debates on one hand, and it gets into, of course, now in the modern age, scientific debates. Science tells us that as a consequence of the Big Bang, physics and chemistry work together to create biology, and that produced life. The whole theme of archetypes is contrary to that. Archetypes basically should be understood to precede the Big Bang. The Big Bang model is very time-space based. It's like we can't assume there's anything prior to that, therefore there must not be, so we can't. So the whole philosophy is based on an assumption that nothing could have come prior to the Big Bang. It's sort of this position taken that therefore must cancel out all other positions, There's all kinds of evidence and indications that it's not working that way. But what we get is that, your evidence must be wrong, because our a priori assumption that there was a Big Bang and that was the beginning of all things, therefore everything else must be wrong. It's like, really? So there is this position that most people are aware of it now. There's a lot of, in this age of Aquarius, there's a revolution brewing, and the revolution is on every front, recognizing that our entire educational system is wrong in many ways. It's wrong about history. It's wrong about fundamental principles of science, even ironically. Like, in other words, there's a mainstream model which has dogmatically asserts a position, but all kinds of good science out there challenges it, but is dismissed. It's no longer science. And the scientific mainstream position is basically two. It asserts a position of focusing on facts, and it focuses on truths. So somehow science has come along and said, well, we're not just interested in facts anymore. Now we want to assert what's the truth, right? But as time has unfolded, quantum physics has come along and showed, well, the facts aren't quite the facts. The facts cannot, the matter of, if you go, as the riddle goes, the matter of fact, or the fact of matter, is that it's not as solid as it seems. Our empirical perceptions don't stand up to the litmus test of atomic quantum models of existence. So it all breaks down. But although that's recognized, not always happily, still the position of truth is held on to tightly. So even though the quantum physics model has undermined the facts, which were upholding the truth, it's not very convenient. It's an inconvenient truth to look at. Therefore, the facts upholding the truth have fallen. So therefore, there's no truth. And you can't hold that position anymore, but it does, with a lot of hoodwinking, if you follow. Most people would appreciate that science is, when we think of technology, when we think of all kinds of technologies, if we can go crazy with anti-gravity, we can talk about antimatter, if you like. You can, we can talk about fantastic aspects of science that can produce technological marvels, and nobody's going to argue that that's pretty impressive, and therefore science is wonderful. And everybody go, yes, that's true. That's really amazing and marvelous, and what geniuses we are. That's really true. However, on the other hand, where science asserts a position of knowing this is the absolute truth, that's called dogma, right? It's no longer in a position of celebrating merely or shall we say, not merely, but let's just say specifically the technological domain of science, which once again, we can all celebrate. But when it goes into this cosmological, theological, philosophical arena and starts to kind of push its weight around, but it's more doing that rhetorically. It's all rhetoric. And even the scientists, the great scientists, many great scientists will say that that's all rhetorical. You're just blowing it out your ass kind of thing. But it's the way it's being presented. And that's why there's everything from conspiracy theories to revolutions and, all kinds of things like that. Then you got the legion of, or a handful of very carefully selected science celebrities, the science celebs. They uphold the celebrity of science now, So anyway, the whole point here is that the question of life is one that needs to be looked at, because when we say life comes from life, we recognize that science can produce many things, but it can't create life. It cannot create a seed. It cannot create a blade of grass. It cannot create anything. Not in terms of that DNA aspect of life. It cannot, like the DNA represents the fundamental building block of creation or existence. We can, and we can go, of course, deeper into the acid of that is at the base of the DNA, and we can get right to the chemistry of it if you like. But still, the assumption is that we one day will be able to create in a lab life. It's like, really? Well, that sounds like a nice position to hold, but it's only an assumption, and it's a conviction, if you like. An assumption becoming a conviction, but it's still just rhetorical. Like in the now of things, you cannot create life and you will not create life. So we have to ask, if that's true, then where does life originate from? Even the Big Bang, the whole assumption, it's kind of like a hoodwinked position. Well, it happened. Oh, it happened. Okay, so how did it happen? Well, we're not quite sure. There was a compression, and, obviously the physicists may come up with more sophisticated answers, but the one they come up with is, it was compressed to the size of a pea, and the entire universe now has come from that. Wow. So are we supposed to buy this? Kind of thing. So when there's a lot of evidence like astrology, one of the main position I take is astrology works. There's no question about it. But it shouldn't work, but it does. So that's why I kind of can sit here and say these things without having a scientific degree. Oh, you don't have a degree, therefore, well, it doesn't mean I'm out of the argument, because I can bring forward very solid evidence and I can back it up solidly with an expertise of how that demonstrating that astrology works, not just how or why, but that it works. That's evidence. There you go. So it is a position where that I can say I can hold this position. And if that's true, therefore, ergo, if this works, therefore your position that it should not, according to your physics, according to your model, then the issue really is with the model. The model that you have carefully constructed and construed, and that's, maybe you're deeply invested, maybe there's a lot of money at stake, but let's not talk about truth. Let's not get into that. because you're not, it's just rhetorical. It's purely an assumed posture of finality. And it's sort of like the whole planet is being held over the barrel, except for those who are in that religion who are championing that we stalemate the situation for as long as we can. So without getting, I don't mean to get too far away from the question of the life that's behind the life. But when we speak of archetypes now, archetypes should be understood as intelligent living things, maybe not breathing things. And that's an interesting statement, so it kind of comes down to how do you define life? But the basic answer is life, it gives birth to life. Life gives birth to life. So even if there was, in fact, a Big Bang, which I personally question to some extent, as do many scientists, there still remains the before it. What was before it? For there to be all over the universe laws and norms and principles, laws basically, that suggests, the laws manifesting as form, rhythm, harmony, beauty, structure, intelligence, right? And a sense of purpose, all of that, all of those words. So there must be something behind it. But because there's this fear of religion, because there's this sort of, it's like a science in a way, it's like a teenager who's still rebelling against the religious parents. I won't believe you, and still kind of holding this ground of, I'm going to the end, hold my position that, I have a right to think the way I want to think. It's kind of like, okay, but you have to suspect there's something there that's a bit amiss, something corrupt or insincere, basically insincere. So yeah, the life comes from life is the recognition that there's all kinds of evidence illustrating that there's an intelligence, a source, etc., to what we now experience as life. But according to the scientific model, it's random and arbitrary, and aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky? And it's like, but if you try and enter into a meaningful debate about it, you'll get dismissed. You're not allowed to talk about that. So it's a pure hypocrisy. The position of science asserting that we will be heard, we will undermine the corrupt church, and fair enough, good, thank you. But now we will become the usurp. We will become the tyranny. We will become that which does not listen, which will not consider anything else, and will hold this position stubbornly, belligerently, deceptively. So that's what we're dealing with in our world. It's no wonder people, and it seems like there's a lot of maybe laws or things being stuffed through the channels while we hold back the truth, which we know is not the position we're holding. Maybe there's big business involved, So that's the position we see. That's what we see in the world. We see that the outer politic of things, the international politics really, / economics, and so forth, suggests that there's a lot at stake to be lost if we were to enter into a larger discussion, to the extent to which all those who do make claims to that there's something beyond or life comes from life are silenced, and now the great people are all atheists. That's what we're left with. Atheists, is that it? Is that what we've arrived at? But there's all kinds of circumstantial evidence, everything from telepathy, the archetypal models that are behind an open-minded, staunch atheist would go, "Well, that was really amazing. That was really spot on. You nailed it. You really got me. That describes me perfectly. Wow." But to connect the dots, to realize, yeah, if I could do that, there's a rationale to how it works that you have to go very deep with, like into an archetypal principle, which means a blueprint. You have to go, but somehow that's missed. Somehow it's like assumed that's kind of a trick, some sort of clever formula or something. And that's what's confounding, but that remains at worst. That's the smokescreen. That's the rhetorical delay smokescreen pattern. For whatever reason, maybe it has to do with politics. I don't entirely understand. The politics could be that of, the delicate balance between the fact that there's still very religious people in the world, and then there's a lot of big business behind the scientific position. Maybe if people thought that there was a life comes from life, they would cry louder about the notion of robots. Who knows? But there's something being hidden, protected, some hypocrisy, some things there. That's why, again, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, basically. It's like, well, there's a lot of intelligent people, scholars, whether, again, in various branches, scientific, historical, archaeological, metaphysical, even, every branch of science. There's all kinds of people who are very bright, who've done a lot of work. They're all silenced, and then we celebrate various people and they get all the press because they're like, I'm an atheist, or, this, therefore that, in a very linear, rather narrow set of logistics that are going on. So I say all this as the front. This is like the barrier that stands in front of a deeper investigation and appreciation that life comes from life. And as I said earlier, the very fact that the model, that the expression of archetypes is evident, and one can, by sincere endeavor, sincerity is the word here. Sincerity is the word. We sincerely look at all the various forms of evidence, that archetypal blueprint. There's something of a design within creation. If we look at that, we don't have to therefore agree that God is a big man. We said this before. We don't have to agree in various attitudes towards divinity. We don't have to agree on a lot of things. We can dismiss all that, if you like. But still, it remains there's some intelligence, some higher purpose, some origin, some source that's behind, and that intelligence, that source, that origin is in its own way, whatever way that is precisely, and I'll humble out here, it's alive. It's got to be alive. So we're talking now that which precedes something like the theory that we call the Big Bang. There's something on the other side, the prior. But what we have is, no, that was the beginning. And since then, everything has random and arbitrarily created itself. Physics and chemistry created biology. Now we have life. But we can't prove you, that cannot be proven. That cannot be proven. We still can't quite create life in the lab, but we will one day. So all of humanity is being held that we will one day. That's like saying, one day I'm going to be a billionaire. And, how about, since one day I'm going to be a billionaire, how about you give me a castle today? How about I be given a mansion? I'd like to have, an unlimited bank account. I'm going to be a billionaire after all, right? That's what it parallels to. One day, no, It's a delay. It's a smokescreen. We don't want to have this argument. We don't want to definitely don't want to make this public because we know we'll lose. But there must be power that wants this position held. It's got to be like that. You just think must be. So I don't mean to get into a dark conspiracy story here. I don't. But there must be a power or an investment. There must be investment that is not interested in knowing more about truth. It's not interested in that. It's interested in investments. It's got to be, because the evidence that life comes from life is there, and the proof that one can create life in a lab using chemistry and physics to produce biology, it has not occurred. So there's no proof. Science, I'm not suggesting, isn't sophisticated. Of course it is. And yes, it can manipulate genes and all kinds, stem cells, and it can do things, and everybody will mostly often agree that's pretty wonderful. But it's not originating. It may be coming up with a new way of new technologies working with what is, and that's darn impressive. But it's not it's not source. It's not origin. And the notion of origin shouldn't produce emotional fervors and let's go on a jihad. It's not like that. Maybe that's the fear. I'm not sure. It's hard to understand, but behind all of this rationale, it's a lot of rationalizing. There's an irrational, it can be interpreted as a massively irrational position, behind, like a conviction, an emotional conviction, because it doesn't want to. The mainstream model, the position is to deflect anything that intelligently challenges it. So the word life, in fact, you could probably use it as an anagram now. That's in English, but you could say living intelligence from eternity, if you like. That would work. There's a living intelligence that exists, and it operates in a strata. That's why I was saying it last time in the discussion of the origin of archetypes. There's a strata, as we see everywhere, whether it's the layers of the cell, the layers of the body, from the outer to the inner, and all the way down to the atoms, if you like. There's layers. Everything's in layers. It's fairly obvious. And so the same is true of the archetypal. Just to be super clear, the archetypal is linked to the laws. So when we talk about laws, we're talking about archetypes, and we're talking about why, for example, the argument, for example, of that there's spheres, suns and planets and moons, etc., are spherical by and large. And the position is that there's gravity pulling it to the center, but they don't know why. It's not understood. Okay, that's understood, but it doesn't seem to stand to reason entirely well with how the notions of physics and the Big Bang work. Not to digress here, but there's this wonderful model called the electric universe model. The electric universe model. Have you heard about that?
No, I've never heard of the electric universe model.
It's pretty exciting. I invite you and anybody listening to go look up just the electric universe. You're going to see some very brilliant scientists who have created basically through observation. They assert they're doing good science. Through observation and study, etc., they're demonstrating with proof that the model of mainstream science that was originated in the West, that's filled with, you have to always remember that it's filled with revolution. Like, the scientific revolution emerged. Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and so on, those main people, and others, Tycho Brahe and others, these astronomers mostly came in, and they were physicists and, etc. And they, in a revolutionary way, broke the grip, broke the yoke of the church and opened the doors to a scientific revolution, which has been great in so many ways. But it still remains that it was revolutionary with emotional fervor, etc. And so various series of science emerged, and it had its moment and opportunity to develop, which is wonderful. I personally appreciate that. But along the way, new science has come along all the way, every step of the way, challenging the initial models in so many ways. Okay, that was a good start. Now we've refined it. We've come up with a new thing. Okay, we refined that. We've come up with a new thing. Okay, and it keeps happening. But what's happened now is it's become corrupt, basically. That's the best thing. And I don't mean to get too political, but yeah, you have to at some point. It becomes corrupt because they're blocking other good science from now coming in and revolutionizing that position. So
isn't that the whole problem, though, Michael? The whole problem is that it's based on revolution, not evolution. So the point being that if we were talking about evolutionary consciousness and we were looking at science from an evolutionary perspective, then there could be multi assumptions or multi-systems that could be co-competing for attention at the same time. Whereas in revolutionary science, the dominant system has to be proven otherwise through revolution. In other words, it has to be dominated, it has to be subjected with overwhelming evidence. So it's sort of like a counterproductive model.
That's a very good way of saying it. It's like a tyranny. The revolutionaries became the tyrants after they overthrew those who they considered the tyrants. That's classically true throughout history. Not maybe always, but probably the great majority of the time. And then, a position is held and, belligerently. But in the face of, the great irony remains that it's in the face of science itself. So the word science gets very loaded. What do we mean by science? Now, what exactly does it mean? And when you get into it, you get into methods of investigation. That's really what science should be. It's methods of investigation on one hand and methods of construction on the other, right? It's basically that. Science is induction, deduction, or the opposite. And then construction. And that's wonderful. Everybody loves it. Everybody's, yeah. But then to take a position, now this is the truth, and that the notion of life coming from life is nonsense. But when we don't want to talk about that too much, the argument's over. Sit down. It's, just behave. It's like, no. No. And, even in, there was a bit of an interesting discussion in the late 19th century. The position of science with mathematics was, this is the perfect language, and it can do away with even philosophy. Philosophy was under attack. You might be aware of that. So the position of philosophy was under attack by the position of mathematics as the perfect language, and all other languages are less than. And after a while, the philosophers, sat back and thought about that. And they said, no, that's not true. You cannot do that, because when you start taking away the realities and the implications of linguistics, of sound, of human beings communicating, the philosophers basically dove into the study of words and language. If math is a language, right, which it is, that's what it's positioned as. Therefore, we then will approach it on that ground. So let's challenge the language of mathematics. And so basically, the language of mathematics in all its various branches and dialects, shall we say, just for metaphorically speaking, is wonderful. But that doesn't mean it's the only kind of language. But
no, and even that's erroneous. Even that's erroneous thinking as well.
Yeah.
Coming from a philosophical background, having a degree in philosophy, the words themselves are artifacts. They have no more value than a scientific supposed proof. They're all after the fact. They're an artifact trying to explain something that's literally ineffable, unexplainable.
Right.
So every scientist has had a eureka or an aha or a brilliant dream or a flash in the pan. Whatever you want to call it is from their intuition. It's from their connection to source, or however you want to describe it. So science and language is only a poor man's attempt to describe it in the reigning existence of cultural or other biases in terminology that cannot contain the full holistic experience that scientist or that person had. So it's really ridiculous to say that we have to hang it on language, because you can't. And you can't hang it on mathematics, because mathematics is still a proof after the fact. So it's like we're forgetting that half of our brain, it's like we don't want to recognize half of our brain, which is the brain that has intuition, has guidance, is connected to the greater knowingness. And if we deny that, then we are really disconnecting ourselves from our own nature and our own inner nature and our outer nature, which is the very sustenance of which we are part of. Anyway, I'm on a bit of a soapbox, because to me this is a really, really important subject. This is why alienation has occurred. We are from nature itself. And we can't do that, because all the systems we create are artifacts. They have no validity. They have no foundation. And therefore, when you go to fiddle with them, you just create a wicked system that gets worse and worse and worse. So if you look at our political systems, our social systems, our scientific systems, none of them are working correctly, because none of them are based on fundamental truths and laws, which are the laws of the universe and the laws of nature. So that comes back to your topic of life comes from life. Yeah. If you don't understand that, then the whole premise on which everything is built is being denied.
Yeah, and
it's go for it.
You are right. It's exactly correct. It's the sincerity. Sincerity agrees with you. That's the key. The sincere, not just nice, gullible, innocent, unintelligent sincerity. No, sincerity that's highly intelligent, highly open, is not defending a position, is simply looking at things with fresh perspective. But what we have is a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of agenda, a lot of whatever. We can use corruption, we can use artifice, we can use control. All of these words are accurate terms to describe that which is standing in the way of discussions that would recognize that life comes from life. There's got to be corruption, power, investment involved. It's just, I mean, I'm not that I know and who, and neither am I interested in pointing fingers. It's become a kind of a position now that it's like a ghost in the machine now. It's like pervasive position that's going to remain forever irreconciled. Just leave it as, but meanwhile, business will be going on as usual. That's the thing, I think. And whatever that business is, that's the question. What is the business that's got the position, the agenda? Now, maybe there's, again, I said it earlier, maybe there's politics at play, but it's still, even if that were true, even if there's delicate politics, it remains nothing more than a wizard behind the curtain. It's a hypocrisy. It's because, well, where is, the thing is, it's like a decentralized now, where, like in the church, for example, there was Rome, there was the Pope, there you go. You can nail it. There it is, right? But this is decentralized. So it's become like an entity in human consciousness. And a lot of people, most people are pretty bright, but not most people aren't serious thinkers. They're not thinking carefully. They're like, their ego's involved. They want to be liked. They want to be loved. They want to be popular. They want to, make a good living. They want to go on vacations. They want to be healthy. All the good things, all good, right? But there's only a small.
They want to fit in.
There's all kinds of all good. But it's if you were to take a demographic in a classroom of any size anywhere right now, you would find out of the 30 kids, maybe 3 or 4 that were wired and serious about what would be seeking a higher truth that they would really think about, that they would really.
Yeah, but you're not encouraged to do that. From the moment you're born, you're taught to fit into the matrix, and God bless our parents. They didn't know any better either. I mean, they were told by their parents that this is the way it is, this is how you succeed. And if you deviate from the norm, there's great pressure, even to the point of being locked up for being in the loony bin, for being counter to the status quo or the matrix. So we are dumbed down from the moment that we're born by the social conditioning around us. And then the school teaches us to sit still and shut up and behave ourselves and become a parrot. So somebody to be intellectually thinking about, wow, what is this universe all about? What's behind the curtain? Like you said, is a radical thing to do and can get that person into a lot of trouble, especially if they speak up. So this is why whoever is behind the curtain, or the whole of society behind the curtain, we've created a very unintelligent universe to live in. It's one, don't question, don't inquire, just fit in and behave yourself, and everything will be all right. You'll get all the toys you need.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. The fruit of science, with technological. And here you're getting a bit of an echo, but the fruit of science is that we have a technological result, which we all can appreciate is wonderful, but those are means. But there is that level of society that focuses on these things as necessities, and that's fine, and it becomes again a language of a debate, language. Okay, what's necessary, et cetera, in the modern world. They're necessities. Okay, good, but still it becomes a vicious circle. It becomes a trap, really. It becomes like a circular argument, I guess, is the case. It becomes rationalized, justified, and so forth. And then it probably very quickly will become personal. How dare you threaten the prospect that I have a car? How dare you threaten anything? So it becomes this egoic attachment to the fruit of science. So if we talk about the fruit of science, nobody's suggesting for a moment, I'm certainly not, and I'm sure you're not, We're not suggesting that the fruit of science be taken away at all, not even for a second. Technology is, by and large, good. Beside it,
well, we might want to question that, though. We might want to question that because as we rapidly move towards, artificial intelligence at an extreme rapid rate, there's, very fundamental questions that we've got to deal with
right.
is what happens when artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent than the human that's trying to control it. And we're rapidly arriving at that horizon very, very quickly and not thinking about the ethics of the decisions we're making. So it again, when we don't come from life comes from life, if we don't believe that there's something greater than us, that we think with hubris that we're the top of the totem pole and we're the grand poobah in the universe and that all should succumb to us, we're really, really pretty naive and very ripe for the picking, I might add, from the very things that we're creating that we think that we'll have control over. Whether it's trying to move cyclones or interfere with the weather or whatever it is, or artificial intelligence. There's so many examples of that where the systems just backfire and we have worse weather, or we have, machines that are uncontrollable.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so without a moral compass in all of this, without a set of ethics, then we're really, there's nobody at the helm, so to speak. We're rudderless.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier, and you're right about all of that. It's the technology by and large is good, but right beside it is the social dialogue, which can be described really as also the politic, the ethics, right? The body politic, the social dialogue right there. But invariably we know, and this is the issue, is that the science has a lot of, this is where I come back to the word investment. There's a lot of power in it. So the power is, from a position of silencing or controlling the social dialogue. It's just another form of modern day monopoly, probably. It's basically monopoly. Good old fashioned power mongering control that simply does not want a dialogue. Fortunately, we are having a dialogue right now at this point in time in history. I do not necessarily, I like to be optimistic, but I do not assume that this open internet reality will remain. I mean, I hope it does. I sure do. But we're not that far away from various forces deciding to turn things off. So in the short, at least right now, there is a very rich social dialogue occurring. And what we're seeing, if we look closely, is, wow, there's a lot of opinions and theories, and some of them are outlandish and crazy, but that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, bring everybody. Like, there's the flat earth movement, and I kind of like that one because I don't believe in the flat earth as such, but I do appreciate the position of perception that it's holding. I do appreciate that it says, well, from a perceptual standpoint, the reason I like that, by the way, quickly, is because it brings forward the astrological model. Astrologers, I'm sure, at least 99% of astrologers will not concur that the world is flat. No, we will not. I'll say that with a certain confidence, okay? But the perceptual reality is from the earth, and how we see what's going on is an important argument. So I don't want to get lost. That's the discussion of another show. But for now, the main point is this. The social dialogue's important. Not everybody, of course, is interested. I pay attention and I observe there's a lot of like cable TV going on. Cable TV, is a marketing machine. That's all. It's not that sinister. It's just a marketing. It's a means of marketing, and entertainment is use to sell things, and we think it's the opposite way, that there's entertainment and we have these annoying commercials. It's kind of the reverse, right? And of course, okay, in the entertainment world, like, there is a whole industry there. It's true. Okay, there's something to be said about the art form of entertainment, whatever form it comes, the movies, etc. Okay, but the main point, and you said it well, and I'm just reiterating, is that it's the social dialogue where we enter into open-minded discussion of truths, principles, ethics, understandings, experiences, etc. If we lived in a sincere, if there was sincerity at the helm of power, that we would be having this discussion, but there is something insincere blocking that dialogue. It just seems as simple as that. And I use the word monopoly because monopoly has always worked that way. It tries to do everything to, block all the doors, so to speak, except the one we're walking through, Right. So so it remains something. So we're getting a little off subject, I realize, and you're bringing it back to, but the point is where we have arrived at. It's inevitable that we would, is that life comes from life is demonstrable, but there's a politic blocking that conversation in as full a way as it should be had, not from an ethical standpoint, but from actually a standpoint that would, if we look back, you said it well, Tyson, if we look at it very carefully, should concern us all. And that is, just because we can do it technologically, should we? Right?
Is it in our best interest?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just should we.
Yeah,
I mean, we're talking about our,
from the standpoint of our best interest, yes. Yes. Should we, according to, but those investments that are involved in the new world, and I like to believe in, I believe in synchronicity. So there's a level at which all of the irrationality of it all may have a synchronistic role to play. Like, what I mean by that is, in this age of Aquarius, the high technological, we're going to throw God to the side and we're going to become God. This is what somebody described that as what the age of Aquarius is. And I thought, well, that would be a pretty good description. And if that's what we're doing, and maybe that's what the game plan is, then I could understand the synchronicity of what is otherwise an important conversation not getting its due, and so there might be factions of humanity that, according to a synchronicity, this is a theory, of course, that feel that we're going to create a big brother, one world order. It's what humanity needs and wants. It's what we need to do to protect ourselves from international nuclear war, right? So maybe
no, aliens. We have to protect ourselves from aliens.
Okay, right. We have to protect ourselves. Like, I mean, I'm trying to offer an apology almost to the forces that, maybe they're saying, well, maybe there's things you don't understand, and like nuclear bombs are a reality. So if we don't create this one world order, we could have a nuclear war. And as the saying goes, it just takes one nuclear war, not two, right? It just takes one nuclear war between two superpowers to be the only nuclear war. So if that's the rationale, if that's the mindset that they say, therefore we have to silence all discussion, all debate, all argument, we're sorry, we'd rather not, but we have to, I would basically could perhaps understand that, if you follow what I mean. So in other words,
sort of understanding, yeah.
We're going to put this artificial barrier, but we have there's a method to our madness, But the main point we would say on that is there's a method to our madness.
But the bigger game is the aliens, because if we have an arms race, which is being sort of ramped up now, with Russia misbehaving, and we got to counter this and counter that, and U.S. backing out of the arms treaty and all that. So we're still in escalation mode when it comes to armaments. There's not enough to go around. There's not enough people buying armaments. So if we could create a bigger problem, which would be the alien invasion, then we can get all of the people that, all of the superpowers that are competing against themselves, compete against something that's even bigger than them. So now we have a much bigger market and a much bigger concern, and a bigger reason why we need a one world government for the security, not of a nation state, but of the planet itself. So we need you to co-op and join us for your own salvation and the salvation of all of humanity. So just sign up here.
They, and maybe perhaps there's the powers that be, the controlling factions of humanity. I'm talking about those powers. Maybe in their mind, they know, and their understanding, they know things, and they have that rationale. And if that's their rationale, like, in other words, this isn't pretty, but we're doing it for your own good, even if it's our opinion, then to some extent, it's somewhat justified. Just to say, but it's still okay. Just having, if we could go with that politic for a moment, that all it will take was one nuclear war between two superpowers, and that's the only nuclear war there will be. Okay, and that's their justification. We go, okay. I personally, I get it. How dumb of me not to think about that, but I have thought about it. But okay. Now, having said that magnificently large justification, now we want to put that justification just to the side for a moment. And so we recognize that justification is working in all kinds of ways that are manipulating. Maybe they are sincere, actually. Maybe there's a sincerity. There is a sincerity, but the way they're behaving appears like a madness, appears like a belligerence, like a tyranny, like a monopoly. Okay, so we said that. Okay, it's said. Now that we know that, we'll put it to the side and we'll go, life comes from life. Because this is a big snow job that's being created, maybe for good reasons, like we just said. But now that we got that, okay, you guys are doing this for our own good. I get it. So what you're doing is you're blocking any real genuine discussion about that life comes from life, because if you're afraid maybe that if we have that conversation, it's going to fudge those important plans. So even though you know it, you don't want us to talk about it because it's going to get in the way of this important agenda. That I can get. That I got it. I almost feel like I got an epiphany today. Oh my God, there it is. That's it. But one thing's for sure, life comes from life. And it's a beautiful thing. That's the high thing. Without getting all like political about it, I'm not getting blubbery or theological. I'm not subscribed to Buddha or Krishna or Jesus. It's nothing to do with the deity or any particular religion at all, right? It's just the fact that and it's a glorious, wonderful, stupendous thing that life comes from life. And, and the evidence is everywhere. One just has to want to see it, right? So what this arrives at now, if you think about it, just to say what we just said, fear has dominated the social dialogue. That's what it really, we're so afraid that we're going to annihilate each other. And I don't mean that's I don't say, it's not for me to say that fear is unjustifiable. Who would I be to say that? Who would anybody? Okay, but it's fear, right? Fear we're afraid that we're going to get into a nuclear war, so to speak, along the lines of this thinking. Oh, okay. Fair enough. You're afraid. And a lot of people would go, there you go. That's enough. That's all I need to hear. And they're right. If that's what they're afraid of, then I'm on their side. Okay. But at least in an open-minded dialogue, we can at least acknowledge what we just said, right? That we know that it's fear. They're afraid of the inevitable, the very real possibility. You probably heard, Tyson, before that there's some fairly good evidence in now the new revolution of history showing that the model of history itself is fudged and erroneous. It just doesn't stand up to facts. It doesn't stand up to evidence, right? It's unscientifically holding a position. Okay, it's another unfortunate casualty of its position. Okay, but basically that there's been advanced societies before ours, and they have had nuclear wars. Like
not only that, they've had nuclear wars. There's some evidence that there's been over 32 civilizations on planet Earth that have actually had an ascension experience. So we're not the first ones through the gate. We're not the top of the heap. We are not the beyond all. If you go and look at the ruins in Bolivia, Peru, the Mayans, you'll find architecture, foundations on which more modern things are built. The stones that are there are with such perfection and such size that we have no technology existing on the planet to cut the rock, to place it, to position it, to move it, or to do anything with it. Yet, from an archaeological perspective, we have to sort of turn away from that with no explanation whatsoever. Or we have to ignore that there were truly giants that walked on the earth 35,000 years ago. Even though we find the bones, we have to cover them up. So every scientific, or every human endeavor that attempts to call itself scientific, which by the way they're not, where there's archaeology or whatever, is covering up the facts. It's an agenda we have on planet Earth. It doesn't serve the status quo or the ruling paradigm, scientific or otherwise, to discuss the facts that will disrupt it. So if we come back to the premise that you said, that yes, we can accept that this all makes sense if we are in fear, that's the whole point. We've got to keep you in fear, because if we can keep you in fear, then you won't question these things. You'll look the other way because you're too busy with your head down, making your money and doing what you need to do to support your family. And God bless you for doing that, or Krishna blessings for you, or whatever blessings for you to do that, because you're trying to keep your head above the water. But it's a snow job. So it is the fear. It's the fear, because if I can keep you in fear, you don't have any energy to think about anything. You can put your head down and get to work.
It does come to mind that, within the complexity of things, once again, there may be a sincerity, ironically, behind the fear, because of what I just said, that only one nuclear war between two superpowers is required for it to be the only one. Okay, that's a sincerity behind the fear. But along the way, there may be a parasitic series of agencies that are benefiting from that position. This is where it starts getting really tricky. So there may be a core sincerity, but it's breeding its own network of other types of corruptions, and so on, right? So that's the issue I see, basically, if that's along the lines of this hypothesis, is that there's a sincere rationalization behind it all. But where it gets really confounding for us, and this is where humanity is at in so many ways, is that the facts are brought forward as the rationalization for the position held, but then all new facts brought forward to challenge that position are dismissed, right?
So they're erroneous. They're erroneous facts. They don't fit in, Michael. They
Yeah.
don't fit into the paradigm. Sorry, we
Yeah.
can't count them.
We can't. We don't want to see that. It's like the mice, right? It's like we don't want to, and you kind of think to yourself, well, it's a kind of a desperate position you've achieved here, because you have to stand, like, despite the sincerity. Why isn't it like some faction of humanity almost come forward and say, all it's going to take is one nuclear war? We can really have this discussion, and we might all agree that, there's good rationale to what you're saying. So let's take this seriously. But once again, it seems that there's other business that surrounds it all, that maybe is all kind of feeding off of the position, so to speak. It's benefiting from this position, but it remains just it remains is that all new evidence, all good, solid facts that come forward that don't align with this position are dismissed, and it's making humanity a bit insane. I think it's making us.
Oh, it is insane.
Yeah, we're going in.
Not a little. We are insane.
Right.
That's the irony of it, is that if you're sane, and if you're that one person you talked about in school that has a consciousness about this and is thinking about these issues, and you start speaking up, you are the one that has a finger pointed at you that you need to shut up and fit up, or you will be declared insane. I mean, so psychology now becomes the weapon to keep you in line, or will diagnose you and give you Ritalin or God knows what other drug to shut you down, because we don't want you to become a sovereign human being. Because if you're a sovereign human being, you'll know that life comes from life. And not only that, you'll get to be able to talk to that source of consciousness inside of yourself. And then, by God, you're going to be uncontrollable, because you're not going to be in fear. And then what's going to happen? We're going to have people doing what they are being guided to do. And, then how can we control them? They're not going to be part of a church. They're not going to even believe in government, because they don't believe that there's somebody who needs to tell them how to interpret their connection to prime creator or source, or life comes from life. So we don't need somebody between us and that intelligence. Then what are we going to do with government and social structure and religion and all these other things that want to say, well, you have no access to higher intelligence unless you're scientific, or that you go to a priest, or if you go to the high priest of whatever movement it is, you're not going to know. But the fact is, when you're a sovereign human being, you do know. You know that it's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah, it's like a protracted patronization. We're massively patronized, but unfortunately, again, when you get closer to that force that's patronizing it, and get really, we're not in secret intelligence agencies. We're not organized. We're just people, right? We don't have any real facts or names and who and what, we don't know that. But what we can see is, or at least we can surmise, as I keep saying, is that if there remains this sincerity at the root, even though it's sincerity around a fearful thing, but in its sincerity, we can see a ray of light, that humanity. Okay, I like that. I like that position, but it remains that there's a whole bunch of corruption that's globbed onto it. And secondly, because it's become so lost in its lie, that we now can no longer have social dialogue, and instead of killing ourselves through nuclear, we're kind of destroying ourselves in other ways, right? We're getting into stalemates and issues and corruptions, and so the whole vibration of humanity is going down.
Yeah, I think the biggest trade-off, as we get to the end of this show, is we're trading off the sense of our sovereignty for the feeling of security, which is, the whole 9/11 experience, which, whether you believe it was a false flag or whether you don't is irrelevant. The fact is that for most of us, we're prepared to give up our sovereign right to feel more secure. The government somehow will protect us from the terrorists or from whoever, or from, you know, the other superpower, or from an alien invasion or whatever. So we're willing to say, oh, well, you know, more cameras, you know, more taking my shoes off before I get on a plane, more documentation, more full body scanning, you know, more cameras, surveillance, wherever I travel, you know, on and on and on. It's just like, come on, people, wake up, wake up. You are buying into an agenda that you don't want to know about. I mean, you're literally giving away your humanity because you don't believe that life comes from life, that somehow your life comes from your government, that without government protection, you're not going to make it. I mean, you're just going to be annihilated on the street by a random shooter or whatever is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And so therefore you're willing to give this all up.
Yeah, exactly. It's become very complicated. That's what the Hunger Games is all about. You know what would be great to discuss? So this life comes from life principle is there. We haven't, you know, thoroughly examined it in every way. What we're seeing is that which is blocking the recognition of it. That it's inevitable. I didn't know we were going to go here strictly, but, you know, we've arrived at a stalemate situation, which we could call insane. We can call it the dilemma of human condition, the human condition at this time. However we want to describe it, it remains that there are sabotaging energies blocking a discussion that would reveal how evident it is that life comes from life. So it's kind of like, if there's a sincerity, it's coming with a very high price, at least in the short term. I want to leave you on a final note of consideration that might be a good discussion for next time, is that book, really we can talk about and around that book, Catastrophobia. Have you ever heard about that book?
Yes. You know, one of the things we can talk about is, that in the whole idea of catastrophe, you know, every 12,000 years we go through this same, you know, devolution or evolution and consciousness, and we have to wake up, and this has been the cycle of humanity. Just like astrology, we keep repeating it over and over again. You know, the exciting discussion for me is to put that all aside. In other words, that's what most of humanity is stuck in, this cycle of the fear and the doubt and the shame and the guilt and co-optation of our energy. What does it look like when we step out of that reality? What does that look like when we don't get overwhelmed by the matrix, or we don't need to discuss about the matrix anymore, or to prove that the matrix exists? Or what happens when we disallow that to be part of the conversation and we step into being sovereign individuals? Then what potentialities do we have through things like astrology that literally shows you the cycles, not necessarily, although it will show you the cycles of bondage with their misuse, but will also show you the cycles of liberation if you so choose. Oh, yeah. It depends on how you interpret and use the evidence that comes from astrology. To me, that's exciting. Because the counter to this whole game is astrology is being used by those powerful forces, or we can call them nameless forces if you want. They use all the astrology in order to use the correct times to do certain things, to co-opt human energy under fear, doubt, shame, guilt, to co-opt the energy for the agenda. Now, whether you believe that or don't believe that isn't really what I'm getting at. Is that what does it look like if we say astrology gives us this opportunity co-creatively and collectively to do things that literally can change the way we show up in the world, and actually changes the world that we show up in?
It does. The astrology as a tool. You have my vote. It's an amazingly beautiful archetypal tool that is based on realities of nature. That's always an important takeaway here. It's not some, you're not like even that's true of tarot and numerology, but astrology, especially when you're dealing with planets and in our solar system in particular. And then it boils down to also the experience of the solar system from the Earth plane. That's an important understanding from this. We as sentient beings on this planet experiencing realistically, or I want to say in reality and perceptually. I say that because there's a relative degree of optical illusion in the notion of, let's say, a planet going retrograde, which we know it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But okay, so this is a very left brain, right brain thing. But regardless, it works.
Yeah, regardless, it works. And seeing as we happen to be inhabiting planet Earth, and that's the astrology that directly affects us, it would be different if we were on Venus or Mars or the Moon, then it behooves us to see what these energetic forces are. What are these archetypal forces that are larger in scope than any man-made conception, scientific, social, revolutionary, conceptual, whatever that comes from our left brain can ever figure out. These are cycles that are going to unfold whether we're right brain or left brain, no brain or whole brain. So to me, that's very exciting.
You know, it is. And I'll tell you, I'll leave you on a final note here on that. One of the important things to note about astrology is that the physics of these planets, like orbiting the sun and, creating a solar system of energy and that's the electric universe for those listening and so forth. Just check it out and you'll begin to enter into a wonderful revolutionary paradigm, which takes the notion of the physics and really indirectly at least, celebrates holism. It's science that celebrates holism, realizing that notions of islands in the universe and empty space are misnomers. They see it differently. They see it more holistically. So it's pretty amazing, pretty wonderful. But I just want to add that as wonderful as is all of the notion of the energies that the planets are creating in this, solar systemic model like that, like a cosmic cell, which we mentioned a while ago. Wonderful as all that is, the archetypes show that the inner meaning that the planets are more like activators, they're external devices. It's like saying a watch with all its gears is maybe telling time, but it's not creating it. If you follow, it's the archetypes are the same way. This is where it gets really interesting, much more interesting. So that the notion of planets and having energies is physics, but the metaphysics of astrology is archetypal. So it shows a blueprint plan. So it's less about forces and it's more about principles of life. It's when you start to look at archetypes closely, you go, oh my God, they're not just talking about again physics. They're principles of life. They go into, like, you can measure. Like I can look at a person's astrology chart, and I can tell you, if you had 10 astrology charts, I can tell you in no uncertain terms who's more emotional, who's more intellectual, who's physically stronger, who's what have you, who's this, who's that. So that's not occurring by virtue of planets causing that. And I wanted to discuss this, so it'll be a kind of a continuation next time. The causation model of science, which is this, cause that, cause the other. It's a domino effect of logic, right? But that's very linear like this. But the logic of astrology...
You're really talking about as above, so below. You're talking about nested systems. You're talking about, what's happening cosmologically or planetary wise is a nested, we are a nested part of that system. In the scale, we're smaller, but in actuality, that same system is occurring inside of us. And therefore that alignment, the choice of whether we're aligned with that or even aware of that and can experience synchronicity, or we're not aware of that, it's still going to be influencing us, whether we know it don't know it, pay attention to it, or don't pay attention. It just is.
The archetypes, yes, the archetypal principle is behind, you said it, nested, but I'll just say it in a slightly different way from my own understanding to clarify. The archetypes are the principles and laws that make up the solar system itself. They are prior to the solar system, right? I just want to say that for everybody listening, just be really clear. Archetypes are like the laws and the intelligence of existence. They're not the outer phenomenology of planets making aspects and having cycles, but that is the mechanics of that are a part of it. And so when you say nested systems, I think that's what you mean, don't you?
Yeah. These are primary forces of creation,
Yes.
or a priori,
Yeah.
a priori to
Right.
creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's it. That's it. That's what's so exciting about them. And I would, people might go, well, how do you know that? Well, when you study astrology and you start to think about how and why it works the way it does, you definitely aren't thinking physics. And if you were a good physicist, and I've looked at that at the level at which I can, because I'm not a trained physicist, I can say, okay, I appreciate that if we were to simply solely assume that it was a position of physics, then I would agree it probably doesn't work. And this is where we get to, this is why, coming full circle, the very notion of that life comes from life implies that the life from which life comes from must be intelligent, must be intentional, must be purposeful, must be whatever you want to call it. And the words are many. And invariably we get to a point of divine and ineffable. It gets to a point where you can use as many words as you want, and there's still not going to be enough to describe. So what do? We refer to it as a god, but or I don't want to say a god, by the way. I just want to say, but anyway, yeah, very exciting. And this is the importance of this. The big picture revealed is to tap on these areas where we're looking at the deep and wide and the behind and the within. That is the essence of the as above, so below, right? We're getting it. And that's why the archetypal origins is so important. And yeah.
Michael, it's always a pleasure. It's been a longer than usual show, but it's been well worth it. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation and explore these issues.
Yeah.
Everybody, same time, same place, every Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern time on the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy Facebook page. We're on Facebook Live, and we'll see you then. And until then, have the best week ever.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Tyson.
Bye for now.
Bye.
The Big Picture Show Revealed is sponsored by the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy, hosted by Facebook Live on the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy Facebook page, produced by The Wellness Show, www.thewellnessshow.ca, and stay tuned, same place, same time. See you next week. Bye for now.